my talk. Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo. Where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course. And on today's show, I wanted to touch on something that I've been kind of stewing on over the last week, right? The last few days, really. And it's the concept of failure, right? And I've been very honest on the pod talking about sort of my struggles, I think, this year, right? And feeling like nothing was really sort of working. Like everything I tried, I just kept hitting a fucking wall, right? And really sort of the better part of this year just being in a place of just, I don't want to say misery, but man, fuck, not being in a great place mentally. And a lot of it was my inability to move past a few particular failures, right? And there was one particular failure that was really heartbreaking at the end of last year. I don't want to get into details because some of it is still in the works in just a new form or whatever, but I don't want to like shit on anybody. But, you know, it's a really heartbreaking thing. It was a project I had been working on for probably almost 3 years, and beyond my control, just sort of fell apart in the 25th hour, if you will, right? And it was particularly heartbreaking because I was under the impression that it was a done deal. And then all of a sudden I get a phone call that it's just dead in the water, right? And as sort of time went on and it really began to hit me, it really shook my confidence and my creativity moving forward. And then, you know, I sort of put a lot of pressure on myself this year, starting the year with really feeling like I had to, you know, go big or go home, basically, right? And not even from a place of like I have to create cool shit, but from a place of like I have to, you know, stack up the win column, basically, because there's been a lot of L's lately. And obviously when you put that sort of pressure on yourself, it's hard to get into a flow state. It's hard to just create. It's hard to produce your best work because you're constantly doing it from a place of needing the external, not just validation, but judging its success based upon how others react to it, or getting in your own head and trying to produce things that you think will be successful for your career and monetarily and attention-wise and things like that. And anybody who's a creative knows that this is just not a good place to do your best work from. And I crashed and burned and had a lot of false starts and just didn't feel particularly motivated to create, or didn't have confidence in myself and my ability to create. The idea of failure really on the large scale that I failed with this project and didn't succeed into bringing it to life as planned, that really shook me to my core. And since, you know, in the last month or so, I've really hit a beautiful sort of creative stride. I've gotten into a flow state. I've figured out a way to sort of just relinquish the feeling or the need for controlling and figuring out what's next, and just allow myself to play and discover and follow my curiosities, right? And sort of allowing them to dictate what would be the next step in my life, right? And what I've begun to realize when I talk about failure, right? Because you know what's always sitting in my mind, and I'm sure a lot of people who are products of immigrant families, and you sort of bear the burden of your parents reminding you that they sacrificed everything to give you a better life, like you better make the most of it, essentially, right? And for me, my family being from Puerto Rico, we don't necessarily have that burden, but it is one of, for me, my parents are both college graduates. They both went on to have professional careers and have the quote unquote American dream of owning a home and the kids and all that stuff, and getting out of poverty. So for me, my struggle was sort of recreating and elevating beyond their success, right? Like their success was the standard. And I've talked a lot about sort of my parents and their feelings about the route of being a creative and not understanding it. And, for them, their fear of me not having stability in life led them to sort of act out in certain ways, right? And to try to convince me to go a more traditional route. Much of their methodology was sort of like in the moments where I would try something and fail, they were very quick to say, "I told you so." I think I choked up a little bit when I said that. They were very quick to say, "I told you so." And I get it, now thinking about it, like they were literally just desperate to try and, make me deviate from this sort of crazy path and journey that I've been on and try to find a more traditional route that had a better chance of me living a stable lifestyle, right? But that mindset of knowing, or that sort of feeling subconsciously in the back of my head of always knowing that I was going to be quick to hear "I told you so" every time I failed, that is something I've carried with me for a very long time. And while I've done my best to sort of fight against it, it still, I think, leaves its mark on me in certain ways that I may self-sabotage or not finish things or not follow through as hard as I possibly could. Or I'm like terrible at self-promoting because I'm scared of the public failure if I go hard at promoting and like this thing doesn't work out, right? And again, I'm gonna get into like just allowing me hint this segment, I'm just setting it up, but what hit me this last week, the phrase achieving failure, like just kind of stuck in my head. I don't know if I like in passing heard it somewhere, but like, you've maybe heard somebody say like, "Oh, they achieved failure doing X, Y, and Z, whatever." And it's meant to be, I guess, like a negative context, right? Oh, this person failed, right? But it's like a fancy way of saying it. But my mind immediately went to the definition of achievement and putting that together with failure and recognizing that my shortcomings in my endeavors or the times that I failed, they've actually been an achievement. And I know that this sounds wild. I know that this is like, I'm sure somebody at home is like, "Dramos, now you're going off the deep end of the bullshit self-help community of like, just saying stupid shit and pretending like it's a profound statement and it doesn't really make sense in practical application and this, that, there." And I get it. I understand that. But I think to zoom out, to give you like what's really happening here in that statement, yeah, it's a fucking ridiculous statement to say that a failure is an achievement, right? On the surface, it is. But I'm digging beneath it because I'm trying to train my mind, and by sharing this with you, hopefully yours, to lessen the power that failure has over us, right? And when you begin to trick your mind initially into thinking differently and to viewing things from a different vantage point, eventually it becomes your normal programming if you do it long enough. And my goal is in the long run that by having this vantage point and continuing to remind myself of it, I can change my relationship with failure and I can no longer fall victim to it the way that I did this year, the way that it stopped me in my tracks after failing on a grandiose scale at the end of last year. And I want to have that conversation today because I think there's a lot of people who, like all of us, fear failure, have maybe had one failure or a couple failures and tried something, and then they just sort of say, hey, not for me, and they walk away from it. Or maybe you have people around you like I did growing up, where they're quick to say, I told you so. Shit, I mean, especially in today's like social media era, we're all failing publicly oftentimes, right? And that's fucking scary. It feels like everybody's watching and everybody's laughing at us. And maybe some people are. But again, when you change the meaning of failure, when you realize it's not really this dirty word that we've been brought up to view it as, it allows you to just keep on fucking pushing, right? And that's literally all that we could strive for, right? I'm a firm believer that success will come in some way, shape, or form as long as you keep getting up every day and doing the work. It may not be what you expected, how you expected, when you expected, but you're bound to step in shit as long as you just keep putting yourself out there, right? It's like dating. You want to find a partner, you have to just go on a million dates. Eventually, after struggling through so many painful dates, you're bound to meet a decent person that you actually like. And that's, I think, the difference between people who are successful and who aren't. And granted, all of us are going to have different journeys. So our failures or our, pathway might be longer, shorter, different than others. But I do think the greatest common denominator is the relationship to failure and your ability to bounce back from it. And I just want to stew on this a little bit. For whoever needs to hear it, whoever's going through some shit, whoever's trying to bounce back after having their fucking soul crushed in some sort of way, be it financially, be it career-wise, be it relationships, be it dream, whatever it might be, I want to have this discussion with you because as I've been talking to myself about it over the last few days, and I laugh because I literally am out loud just having a full-on conversation with myself, like walking through my kitchen cooking lunch. It's really lightened the load for me, and I want to discuss that a bit. So we'll do that in our Mi Gente segment. Mi Gente. Now, I've currently been in like full-on book mode for the last month. As I've kind of teased, I've been writing a book. So in my book, I use a lot of pop culture references to teach various lessons, right? So in the spirit of that, that's kind of where my mind has been. And I started thinking about like, who are some of the people that are hands down recognized as like the GOATs, the greatest of all time in their particular field, right? And a person that always tends to come to mind to me is Tom Brady, who was a quarterback in the NFL, right? And again, you don't have to be, like, as with any of my analogies, you don't actually have to be a fan of the thing that I'm talking about to get the message, right? You don't know shit about sports. But Tom Brady is widely recognized as the greatest quarterback to ever play in the NFL, right? He's the Michael Jordan of the NFL. But as you study like the career of Tom Brady, and like I just sort of like was wrapping my brain around this. Tom Brady has won the most Super Bowl rings of any player in history. He has 7 rings, right? And for any NFL player who truly gives a shit, like he did, the ultimate goal every year is to get a ring, is to win a Super Bowl, right? That's why he does all the hard work. That's why he played as long as he did, trying to win as many as humanly possible. But when you look at his career, Tom Brady played for 23 seasons. 23. So that means that 16 out of the 23 times he tried to reach his goal, he failed. He failed. But we still talk about him as the greatest of all time, even though he failed more than he succeeded at the given goal at hand. We still celebrate his greatness as literally the greatest of all time. And I think it to me, it serves as a really like easy reminder and analogy of the fact that in life we are going to fail more than we succeed. And we have to accept that. I think so many of us go through projects and ideas and we sort of don't grasp the fact that we're going to hear more no's than yeses. Right? Like that's just the fact, the truth. Every time we try something, it's not going to work. And in the case of like fucking Tom Brady, that it doesn't have to. Right? It didn't have to work every time for him to be considered the greatest. It just had to work 7 out of the fucking 23 times that he tried. Because that 7 was good enough to put him ahead of anybody else, because that's how hard it is to achieve that particular goal. And in general, that's how hard it is to achieve success. And I don't know why it particularly resonated with me. It was kind of like one of those moments, like I'm like thinking to myself and like, you know, not talking to myself in the nicest way, but I'm like, dummy, of course you fucking failed. And not because you're not good enough, but because that's the inevitability of fucking trying. You are going to fail more than you succeed. Accept it. And that's the, like, I guess the hard part to wrap your brain around. But it's also like, it's one of those things where it's like we're kicking the shit out of ourselves on a daily basis. And we are allowing other people to chime in with their I told you so's, when literally it defies logic to think that every time you try something, you are going to be successful at it. And this is the fucked up thing about people's ability to appreciate those outside of their immediate access, right? Because again, people will largely, without really any debate, crown Tom Brady as the greatest of all time, even though he failed more than he tried. But God forbid you, as their friend, their son, their parent, whatever it might be, you drop the ball one time or something does, or you take a risk and it doesn't pan out. All of a sudden, it means that you're terrible and you're not meant to be doing this. And we listen to that shit. And I think that's sort of like, we have to get this all through our head. Like, people have these fucking obscure and skewed ways of viewing things. We have fucked up and you know, skewed ways of viewing ourselves. We hold ourselves and those around us to unreasonable standards that literally we don't do for anybody else. That we are able to celebrate somebody for the same thing that we would denigrate somebody close to us. Or social media. I mean, the shit is even worse because it's strangers just saying stupid shit for no reason. It reminds me of the A$AP Rocky quote where he talks about, like, when did it become uncool to try? People making fun of you for trying. And on the idea of achieving failure, it is a fucking achievement. No matter, like, the social connotation around the word failure. You know what failure really means? Like, when you look at something, you say, okay, I got up today, my goal was to do this, this, and that, and I failed at it. Maybe you didn't achieve the intended goal, hit the intended target. But you actually went and tried to do something. That's a success in itself. And not to say that you should hold yourself to a low standard and not strive for greatness, not strive to achieve your goals. But I think you can exist in two places where You're striving for greatness, but you're also not kicking the shit out of yourself when a plan doesn't come to fruition the way you would have hoped. Because there's still value within that, right? I think what a lot of us sort of fail to realize, and like, you know, social media and shit is so noisy, and in general in life, a lot of people talk without actually having real knowledge on what the fuck they're talking about, right? And I don't even say that in like a denigrating way, but like, what did my parents know about success as an entrepreneur or success in the entertainment industry? Nothing. But they were giving me their opinion every time they had the chance. And I listened to it. And maybe I didn't follow their wishes, but I wouldn't say I listened to it, I internalized it. I allowed it to chip away at my personal belief system, what I knew to be true. Because anybody that's actually tried to do anything, regardless of the outcome, you know that you fucking achieved something, right? That's why I love having my like to-do lists, and I break down my goals into small steps, because there are certain things that are going to be beyond my control, right? I am currently, as I told everybody, you know, I'm currently writing a book, right? And the goal is to get a book agent who then helps me get a publisher, right? And that's the process I'm in right now. But if that doesn't happen, I still achieved something. I still conceptualized a book idea. I still wrote chapters for it. I still reached out to agents and did my research. I still learned about an industry that I've been interested in. I've still put myself out there, right? So, yeah, if a publisher doesn't pick it up or a book agent doesn't want to sign me, I failed at that greater goal, but there were successes along the way, right? And I think that's where the achieve failure comes into play, because there's still achievement within that is meant to be celebrated, right? And even like putting the words achieve and failure together, admittedly, like even to me personally, it sounds sacrilegious, right? But again, I think what we're trying to do is the mindset, right? Because this is where I personally fall, or in the past have fallen into like my woe is me, my depressive stages, and those things, right? Where I've been the type of person who prolongs is not the word I'm looking for, puts off celebrating themselves or puts off their happiness until they've achieved said goal, right? But what's been toxic about this is, with the sort of idea that inevitably we're going to fail more than we succeed, I end up kicking the shit out of myself more so than I end up celebrating myself, right? And for a long time, I found no value in the journey, in the process, and the idea that I at least went for it. I sort of devalued that, right? And as a result, really made myself so fucking miserable in the process. And this year was a great reminder of that, because I think I had gotten better at not prolonging or putting off the celebrating or the appreciation. But what led me down that dark sort of mental path that I went through this year was not appreciating all that was achieved in that failure, right? Because without getting into too much detail, I failed in an industry that I had never even dipped my toe into. And while the greater goal of bringing that project to life failed, there were so many little successes along the way. Successful pitches, right? Successful, ideas. I'm trying to be as vague as possible. Successful meetings with high-level executives in a large industry. Successful in that we got an offer to buy said project, right? That there was a contract. Like, that's all. There's so many little wins along the way. And again, yeah, the greater goal was to bring it to life, but it doesn't diminish the fact that there was an achievement that happened. There was a knowledge gained, connections that were gained in that process that would have never happened if I would have just sat on my hands and never tried this thing. And that's where the achievement comes into play, right? And by the way, if you've ever actually gone out and tried something, you are in a very small percentage of people, because most people have an idea, they have a dream, and they never actually do anything with that idea or dream, right? They're held back by fear of failure. So if you actually went for it and failed, again, that's an achievement because you're in a rare group of people. And I have some specific numbers that I wanted to get into regarding that, because you'd actually be shocked how small the percentages of people who go after their dreams and continue fighting for their dreams. And we'll touch on that after we take a quick break. We'll be right back. All right, we are back. And I want to remind you of the rare air that you will find yourself in if you have ever even tried to bring something to life, okay? Because even though I've talked about, I know for a fact how rare it is, just even by people I come into contact with. And by the way, some people, I have a lot of friends who are like living out their dreams or have done great things. And they'll come to me and we'll just be talking about ideas that they have. And they'll hit me up for advice or whatever it might be. I'll give them my take. They'll be energized, excited, and like, next day they're texting me like, man, great talk. I'm so excited to try these things. And then all of a sudden, a few months later, it's like, boom, they've completely forgotten about it and didn't even bother trying or putting any of that stuff into practice, right? Or trying to bring the ideas to life. Like they've sort of, were high on the fairy dust of the excitement of it and then fell off the wagon somewhere along the way, right? And that's the majority of people that I come into contact with. Majority will not follow through. Majority won't even put pen to paper of an idea, right? It'll stay in their head. Majority won't even speak it out loud. And while I know that, to look at the numbers, specifically like percentages based upon, studies, it just adds even to my argument about how much of an achievement it is to actually fail. Right? So according to a LinkedIn post, only 8% of people achieve their dreams, while 92% give up or fail. Medium.com says that 95% of people give up when faced with challenges, obstacles, and setbacks, while only 5% persist. The 5% who persist understand that success is a marathon, not a sprint, and are committed to reaching their goals. So think about that. 95% of people give up when they're faced with a challenge or an obstacle, right? Like I'm literally still at a loss as I read these numbers, and this. I mean, it like feeds perfectly. And I just Googled this while I'm recording here, and it feeds perfectly into what exactly I'm talking about here, because continuous failure is a fucking achievement. Only 5% of people continue on after hitting even just a setback, let alone completely failing. So the fact that I continue to put L's on the board is a win because I'm in a very small percentage of people in this world, right? I am of the 5% of people who is saying, "Thank you, sir. Can I have another?" And that is why, while I haven't achieved everything I want, I've also achieved so much of what I want, right? It's why I've been able to do the things that I do, is because I exist in that 5% who continues to push on regardless of failures and setbacks, right? And that's why every time I fail, it's an achievement, because it means I got up to fight again, right? I got up and participated in being a part of that limited 5%. That's what that failure represents. That's a fucking win right there, right? That's what makes me, confident and allows me to continue to believe in myself, because I know I'm of a small percentage of people, right? I am operating in a very limited space, and by doing so, that means a win is inevitably going to happen, because I keep getting up and trying. And I think this is how we have to start, what we have to start reminding ourselves of. I think, I'm reminding myself of that, right? Because it's, and I'm like, I'm thinking back on myself, in this year, right? And some of the negative self-talk that was happening, as it felt like nothing was working. And it's like, it's why, one of the like revolutionary ideas or revolutionary mindsets for myself has been the idea of like, cross the street and just look at it from a different angle. I guess what I'm getting at, I feel like I'm talking in circles. What I'm getting at is I could save myself a lot of unnecessary suffering if I just adapted this mindset, right? And I just began to create a thought process in my head that every time I experience a failure or a setback, instead of it being the end of the world, instead of it being something I beat the shit out of myself about, I train my mind to say, this is a moment to appreciate and to celebrate, because it means that you're actually trying, right? You're actually making progress, because you actually had to take this basically like from an idea in your head, and you had to do something with it in order to even experience a setback or a failure, right? You had to at least take one step forward. So that failure actually represents progress. Now, again, I'm not saying it doesn't fucking suck for things to not work out. I'm not saying it doesn't suck to be disappointed that things don't pan out, to want something so badly and for it not to happen. It's a gut-wrenching feeling. But my theory, I guess, on this is, how do I make it hurt just a little bit less? Right? Because it's like, it's at the end of the day, it's as with anything, mindset is everything. Right? My ability to stay strong in my convictions and block out other people's opinions, that's an internal thing. That's a mental dialogue that happens, right? My ability to not be completely derailed by a setback or failure, that's mental. That's how I end up processing what just happened, right? And if I can process it in a manner that doesn't feel so bad, it makes it far easier to sort of get up if I've been knocked down, right? It actually makes it, instead of getting knocked down, it's more of a stumble, right? And that's what I'm talking about here with this concept, And I know it's like probably sounds silly to some, but when you begin to think about it in this, it's just brain training. It's rewiring your brain to not be as affected by things. I mean, and shit, that's what just about anything is. Right? When I went away to the personal growth retreat, the Hoffman process, a lot of it is brain training. A lot of it is creating new grooves in your mind that like create these buffers, right? And not to say that you're going to be perfect at it all the time, but it's like simple buffers. Like, my dog might do something to piss me off. And prior to the Hoffman process, I might have like lost my cool or yelled or whatever it might be. And not to say that sometimes that doesn't still happen, but more often than not, because I've trained my mind to have more of a buffer system, I end up having like a sort of like pause in between my reaction, like a processing moment. I end up like, he like gets into the garbage or knocks something over or breaks something, and I feel the sort of frustration or anger come up inside of me. But before I react, my brain then goes into that buffer that reminds me, how do you want to, what's the best way for you to come across here, like the healthiest manner? And reminds me like he's just a dog. He doesn't know any better, right? And that is something that I programmed in my mind through, the work of that retreat, through the different processes they have. And that's all that this is as well. If I could change my relationship with failure, then it no longer has to be something I live in fear of, nor does it have to have something that actually has any real power over me or stops me from continuing to do what I want to do. And that's the goal here. That's why when I say achieve failure, when you look at it as something to be celebrated or as a victory in the moment, a win along the way, a moment of progress, it no longer has to be like the fucking, nail in the coffin where you then say, I'm giving up on my dreams from now on. I can't take it anymore. Because that's where I was at. But now, as like, hindsight's 2020 and reflecting, it's like, man, there was a lot of progress made. I made connections. I learned a hell of a lot. I'm still here creating new projects even after that. I'm winning. I'm achieving something. Again, I'm in a small percentage of people. And that small percentage of people inevitably find success. Those are the ones that make their dreams come true because they keep fucking trying. So, yeah, that's my rant. This is the message that, Dramos at the beginning of 2024 needed to hear. And shit, I still need to hear it at times. And hopefully this, resonates with people. And we'll kind of summarize. I feel like I was like fucking going all over the place with like rants and thoughts. But we'll summarize all that I talked about today in a neat little bow in a segment we call Conclusion Stew.
Time for Conclusion Stew.
All right, so this is like my weekly brain dumps that are happening. But I don't know, man. I think what sets us back in life, so many people, and what allows, I think, the noise to seep through, be it the I told you so's, be it the, the fear of being shamed publicly. It's the power that we give this word failure. It's the power that we give to losses. It is the unnecessary meaning that we attach to them. And it's why the crazy percentage of like 92 to 95% of people never actually achieve their dreams. Because they give so much power to this word failure. They give so much meaning to their losses, their setbacks. And this is why I always say like it's you versus you out there. And I say that in a way that yeah, I know it's easier said than done. I always want to make sure I remind you, like, I'm not fucking saying like, why haven't you just realized this already and applied it? I get it. It's not. It's these are words, and in when you have a clarity and you're not in the situation, it's easy to just have this unemotional, logical way of thinking about it. I get it. But the goal is to become better at having that awareness in the moment, in the heat of the emotion of whatever you're going through, to be able to look at yourself from the outside looking in, right? To sort of I envision like my soul leaving my body, and I'm looking at my body, and that is how I'm assessing the situation, rather than just internally allowing my emotions to be the ones that are gonna make, interpret what's happening or not happening. And I think when we, again, begin to change our relationship with things that are viewed as negative, and we begin to, take action and instill practices that will diminish their power over us, that's when it becomes far easier to show up as the version of yourself you could be proud of on a consistent basis, right? So for me, it's like, again, how do I take away the power that failure has held over me, right? Well, I actually can recognize that it's an achievement. I can recognize that it actually represents progress. I can recognize that the fact that I even failed put me in a rare percentage of people who are actually trying, right? And I can recognize that the ones who have found success, the people that I look up to, have also failed more than they've succeeded, just as I have, right? I'm swimming in really high level waters. I'm breathing high level air, essentially, right? The fact that's what my failure represents. The fact that I have these continuous losses that I can look at puts me in a very rare group of people, in a very rare class that I want to be a part of, right? The people that I look up to, I'm operating on the same playing field as them with the same sort of mindset by the fact that I continue to get up every time I fail. That's an achievement right there, right? And when I stop trying and when I allow failure to take over, as far as diminishing my drive and empowering it to the point that it tells me to stop and I listen to it, I then end up falling into the 95% of people who are going about living their lives unfulfilled because they're scared of failure. And that's not the group of people that I want to be rubbing elbows with. I want to be rubbing elbows with the 5% who have made their dreams come true just by proxy of them getting up every time they failed. Like, that's who I want to be amongst. That's the cocktail party I want to be enjoying. And in order to do so, I just have to keep trying and keep failing and being okay with it, right? Because inevitably, a win is going to happen. And I don't even need to win all that much. I just need a couple wins, right? Again, the Tom Brady example. 16 out of the 23 times he tried, he failed at his goal. Yet he's still considered the greatest of all time. That's proof right there for any of us. It's not about how many times you lose. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter that the loss column is just stacking, one after the other. If the loss column keeps getting bigger and bigger, that's actually a positive thing, because it means you are continuing to try, and inevitably you're going to trip, fall, stumble, and step in shit. It's inevitable at some point in time. But in order to do so, you just have to keep getting up. So every day that you get out there and you do something towards your goal, that's a fucking win, right? Every time you have a setback or a loss or a failure, it's a win because you made progress on an idea that you had. Again, 95% of the people won't even bother. 95% of the people will stop at the smallest setback. Most people will never have something leave their head, right? It will literally just sit there as an idea in their head that they wonder about. So if you failed, you have achieved something that majority of the people in this world will never actually be able to relate to. The fact that you actually went for it, that's a fucking win right there. Keep going. Keep winning until you win, at the bigger goal at hand. That's my message for today. And I'm taking that in with me for the rest of the day that I have ahead of me, as a reminder. Like, keep achieving failure. It means that you are in rare air and you are rubbing elbows with the greats that have come before you. Amazing. Amazing. Hope that was I needed to remind myself of that message. I hope that was helpful for anybody listening. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. That said, I'll catch you on Thursday for our Thursday Trends episode. Till then, stay safe and we'll talk soon. Peace.